Hello and welcome to episode number 6 of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. Today is Sunday, July 13th, 2014. I'm Melissa Agnes, and this podcast is brought to you by Agnes Day. Let's talk crisis intelligence. Hello, Patrice. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me today. So why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about what you do?
My name is Patrice Cloutier. I'm a civil servant in Ontario. My antecedents, what's brought me here is that I used to be a radio reporter. I moved into government work on the PR side, strategic communications planning, and a couple of years into that, because of my earlier military career, I was brought into a little bit more of a crisis management, emergency management type of portfolio, and I've specialized in that in the last few years. And with the advent of social networks, that gave me an opportunity to further explore, new ways of handling crisis.
Oh, we sound similar. Well, except your military and reporter background. You've done the rounds.
That's right.
Yes.
I'm old too.
Oh, well. And we're both from Montreal.
Yes, indeed. I'm from the east part. I'm from Pointe-aux-Trembles originally.
Huh? And I'm from, Western Montreal. I'm on the island.
There you go.
Yeah.
The east meets west.
The east meets west, yes. So we thought that we'd talk about the art of the apology today. And I think it's an amazing topic because there's so many examples that we're continually seeing. And there's so many different layers to opposition, to how to give a good, a good apology. So we've seen recently, most recently, I believe, was the whole Donald Sterling episode.
Yes, indeed. You know what? I think that, and that needs to be said, but, it surprises me how many people, corporations, senior executives are totally unprepared to face crises. Obviously, the best apology is when you have no reason to offer an apology, when you avoid crisis altogether. But, we don't live in a dream world. So you have to be prepared. And I think a good component of your crisis communications plan is how to make sure you say the right thing at the right moment to the right audiences. And that's a big part of what the art of the apology is all about.
Nicely said. So why don't you talk a little bit about that from your perspective, and I'll chime in. So the art of saying the right thing at the right time, and how can you plan for that?
Yeah, well, I'm a big adept or a proponent of the crisis communications technique, the message mapping technique. Dr. Covello in New York, for a few years now, I've used that. And it allows you to understand what some of the situations that might come at you in terms of if you're a corporation, an agency, a government, a senior executive, even an entertainer. You should be aware of, what risks lie in wait for you. And when they do present, when a crisis does erupt, first to have the ability to recognize that, take a step back and say, okay, what do I do now? And hopefully you'll be able to handle it and it'll go away and you'll move on. But sometimes, bad things do happen and you've made a mistake, or somebody who works for you has made a mistake, or the process you have in place, your excellent record perhaps might be a little bit tarnished by no fault of nobody. Something's just bad things happen. Mm-hmm. You need to be ready for that, and you need to acknowledge that. And I think one way to do that is to be as honest and transparent about it as you can. And too often we see senior executives and large corporations and even governments try to avoid the appearance of a crisis. It's routine. We don't need to devote as much attention or resources to this. And they neglect the fact that, it is not a routine situation, a crisis. You need to dedicate, specialized resources and staff and procedures to dealing with the crisis. And for some managers, senior executives, that's almost to them almost like an admission of defeat or an admission that they're not up to par. In my view, that's the total opposite. If you're a good leader, a good manager, recognizing that there's danger ahead makes you an even more effective leader, because you can navigate through the shoals and get to your destination much better in a crisis. So you need to have a plan in place, and part of that should ensure that whoever is going to be your spokesperson has the appropriate skill set, training, experience to, if the case points to the fact that you might have to apologize publicly, that you do so and it's believable, it's transparent, it's compassionate, and it'll be convincing to your audiences and your various stakeholders, and that needs some preparation ahead of time.
Absolutely. I love that you said that it's believable. You can't just say that you're sorry. You actually have to show and prove that you're sorry. Prove that you're sorry, but also show it while you're saying it, especially if it's on camera.
Oh, absolutely. The camera doesn't lie. I won't mention the name, but there's a famous golfer who got involved in some marital difficulties.
How subtle.
Yes. And if you remember, his apology was kind of both at the same time bland, robotic almost, and kind of very detached, very unemotional.
Well, we saw the same thing with Lance Armstrong, and then he later admitted in his interview with Oprah, saying that he actually never felt sorry. He never felt like he did anything wrong. He never felt guilty. So you can't say that you're sorry, if you don't mean it.
You've done things badly when you have to apologize for your apology.
Oh my goodness, we can talk so many examples. Paula Deen, she put out 3 in, I don't remember how long, but very, very in close proximity to each other. And all 3 of them just completely sucked. And they dug her. Actually, what she faced originally was an issue. And her lack of taking responsibility, or being able to take responsibility and truly, sincerely apologize, is what developed it into a crisis, is why she didn't come out a strong leader. And so her partners and her sponsors dropped her.
And so that's one end of the spectrum, and perhaps the other end of the spectrum is the old Maple Leaf Foods experience, where the CEO came forth not once but twice when the same issues reappeared a few months after the original Listeria outbreak that killed 20 people or so across Canada. When some of the measures that they'd put in place failed again and they had to stop production at one of their facilities, he came back and said, hey, listen, we've made another mistake, but let me assure you that is what we're doing. So I was talking a bit earlier about Dr. Covello's message mapping technique, and one of the templates he uses is CCO. It stands for compassion, competence, and optimism. And I think in a crisis, the compassionate part really has to stand up really, really brightly. In an apology, I think even need to be even pushed further. You have to say you're sorry, and it might even be in where legally and in all practicality you did nothing wrong, but your products, your procedures, your company became embroiled in something bigger. You probably need to take a step back and say, okay, the right thing for us at this moment is to say to our stakeholders, our clients, our various audiences that we've goofed. Here's what we're doing about it. We're really, really sorry about it, and we want to apologize to everybody who might have been affected. Here's what we're making sure that this doesn't happen again. And, hold yourself accountable to that. Obviously, there's all sorts of legal and, corporate barriers in making that kind of affirmation very publicly. But I think, in my opinion, it's absolutely necessary for it to have any kind of resonance with your various audiences.
It's so true. And there's the attorneys that I work with who understand the whole social media, real-time communications, two-way just the whole reality of what we face today when we deal with crisis, they understand the need to apologize when there's a need to apologize. But often organizations are confronted with pushback from their legal counsel because to them, an apology is an admission of guilt. However, there are some laws being passed now. I'm going to have to check where, I can't remember at the top of my head, but there's laws being passed that says that if you apologize, you can't be held against you in court.
I think that's a fairly common thing, I think, right now. Obviously, there's legal parameters that obviously have to be observed, and, lawyers do serve a purpose. But I joke often when I do something like crisis communications training, that one of the first things you should do in a crisis is listen to the advice of your lawyers and then log them out of the room. But I won't say that. I won't say that into this forum. I'm just trying to say, though, that sometimes you have to do what feels like the right thing. And that's fairly important. And that's something that your audiences will relate to. If you're trying and are seen as being transparent, honest, and trying to do the right thing, I think people will naturally give you a good amount of leeway. If you're trying to obfuscate, minimize your involvement, if you're trying to say, well, it was a little bit our fault, but not really, or the whole passing the buck thing, that does not go over well, particularly in the era of social convergence, where words and statements can be distorted, dissected, analyzed, and their opinions shared broadly, instantly on social networks, and then you're like really behind the eight ball right away. A crisis has a kind of a lifespan and a rhythm to it, depending on what it's about. And early on, you have to put your first responses in play, and get your crew together and analyze what you need to do next. And at the decision point where you say, okay, we need to come forth here and say part of this is our fault, say we're sorry, figure out what you need to do and make things better, and make sure that type of thing doesn't happen again. You need to make sure that when you do that, you find the right spokesperson. It might not be your president or your CEO, right? If we all have different abilities and all different levels of confidence to stand up and in front of the media or groups of people and so on, you have to have somebody who will convey what the cultural, exactly, and what the culture of your enterprise is. And usually it's the founder or CEO that embodies that. I'm just saying that it should not be an automatic decision. We saw what that can result in after the Lac Mégantic.
I was just going to say that. MMA. Yes. That was exactly. He needed to be the spokesperson in that case. We're talking about, what was his first name? His last name was Burkhart.
Edward, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. Edward Burkhart. And he needed to be, because they had labeled him everywhere. If you go searching, or if you went searching on their site, his name, he was just a chairman. He wasn't even the CEO of the company. His name was everywhere. He was the go-to person. What they did wrong was first naming somebody, because you can't pretend to care if you don't care. And if you don't care in a situation of that tragedy, of that magnitude of tragedy, then you don't care and you can't portray that. But they didn't even have, I mean, this is something that hit both of us close to home. I have friends of friends who died in that explosion. And to watch the lack of compassion and the lack of care that this man exuded was just, it was unbelievable, especially when, I mean, you started this conversation with talking about, looking at the risks and what can happen and when apologies will need to be made and how to go about preparing for that and outlining that. This is a predictable risk, unfortunately.
Oh, and obviously it's an extreme illustration, but there's a whole series of things that could have been handled much better in that. The first few days, where was he? He was nowhere to be seen. And I think the expectations at that point really grew exponentially, that when he did show up, that he would really have to hit a few home runs to, right the ship and pointing in the right direction. And unfortunately, I think the gentleman in question was kind of overwhelmed by the magnitude of the event, and he kind of resorted to what he knew
Blaming.
Like,
He resorted to blaming at first.
That's right. Yeah. Well, how can you apologize if you don't even at first acknowledge that some of it might be your fault, and then you blame firefighters, you blame your own employees, and whoever else that might be around. That doesn't go well with the public, certainly. But what I was trying to say, I think, I'm trying to stay away from like blaming individuals, because we don't know how we'll react if we're ever put in that sort of situation. I think that his zone of comfort was the very technical aspect, and he stuck to that. And he lacked compassion when he did that.
Yeah. Well, my point in saying that he was all over the website that had to put it to him, is that one, from what it looked like, he wasn't pre-trained. He didn't seem to have media training. He didn't seem to have any type of crisis communications training. And second, they didn't give themselves a scapegoat to go to a second spokesperson, because he was so dominant all over, there everywhere.
I know they set him up to fail in their corporate positioning. That's for sure, and it was obvious to me that he wasn't prepared. And I think the company as a whole wasn't prepared. And one of indications of that is, I don't know if you remember, but on the Saturday night when they first issued their news release, the first time they communicated after all this, 12 or 16 hours after the fact. They issued their news release in English only. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember that. It happened, for listeners out there, it happened in a very French community.
Absolutely. And not only that, and then when they realized their mistake, they issued the French equivalent, but it was through Google Translation or something. Yeah. It was full of mistakes. And then finally, on the third time, they perhaps got it right. But that just shows, again, a total misunderstanding or lack of knowledge of who your audience is. And in a crisis, that can be totally devastating, because if you don't establish that first rapport right away in terms of, okay, I know who you are, I know what you're going through, then you can show your compassion. But if you don't even have an understanding, and I'm not talking necessarily about the linguistic aspects here, but if you don't even that understanding of who your audiences are, how can you show that compassion and find the right words, the right tone that will make you relate to what they're experiencing? And I think, to me, it's hard to teach. It can be prepared, but you have to have the right person with the right skill set and the ability to really, show that kind of a compassion publicly. Yeah. I'm not saying that, you go to the dais and you start crying. It might work in some occasions, but you don't need a robot. You can't have a corporate drone represent you and just say, well, we said our piece and then we'll move on. It won't work.
There's a good example. There was it's on my blog. I think it's an older example, but I'll never forget it. The Australian Army, the general, yeah. When they were dealing with, I believe it was a very big issue, one that armies always face. I don't know if it was discrimination against women or worse. I think it might have been more physical abuse towards women within the army. And he put out a message. He didn't have to put out a video message, but he chose to put out a video message. And this is a man who's a general in the army, who's in his seat in front of the camera in his full uniform. And you know that this is a tough person. You know that this is a perfect person for the role that he plays within the army. And he got there because he worked to get, he just fit his role very well. He was very serious. He also, even in his severity, though, you could feel the compassion and the care that was coming from him about the subject and how much he meant what he was saying. And the message was that we have zero tolerance.
Yeah, I remember that video well. I thought at the time that he was speaking like General Dad in terms of the victims, all the women in the service.
He was amazing.
That they might have been his daughters, and that's the kind of anger, sadness, and desire to do much better that was so transparent. And you're right, that was a good example of how to do it right. But another occasion, I don't know if you remember the FedEx, when one of the delivery people threw a box containing a large screen TV over a fence. Viral. And obviously that went viral in no time.
It was one of the first ones that ever happened, so of course it went viral.
and you know, the VP of FedEx, I think the day later or maybe 2 days later, or very shortly, they put this video together and say, hey folks, this is not what FedEx is all about. And I don't know if you remember that, but that also appeared to me as very convincing. And this guy was standing up for, you know, the thousands of people at FedEx who took their job, who take their job very seriously every day and make sure your packages get where they're supposed to go. And to me, okay, that works too, you know.
I was just going to say, that's a different approach. It's a different angle for a different situation. He was showing that what happened was wrong, but he was also standing up for, just like you said, everybody else on the team who does not do that. That this was an exception to the rule, not the consistent, you know, not consistently what happens. So it's a different way to approach that, but it was needed in this case. But again, it's the art of an apology in a different light.
Yeah, and you know, it shows me that the video is a really powerful tool if you're going to do that sort of thing.
If you're going to do it right. Paula Deen tried 3 times.
Well, no, you're right. Obviously, it's a little bit more sophisticated.
Yes.
If you do it too well, perhaps it takes away from the compassion element. But you have to find the right balance. And to me, it's important to use, like, for example, something goes viral on social networks, something, an issue that becomes a crisis. To me, it's an absolute imperative that you have to fight or combat or counter that on the same platform that bad stuff is being said about your enterprise, your company, your organizations, whatsoever, to make sure that you reach the audience you want to reach.
Absolutely.
So that's why
if people are lashing out on Facebook and you go and post a picture on or a Vine,
yes,
nobody's going to get it.
Yeah, that's a clear example of that. And a recent one, a couple of months ago, when one of the passengers on an Air Canada plane filmed the crew that were taking some liberties with some luggage. That went viral too across Canada, if you remember, and far abroad as well. One of the things, and I wrote about this, is one of the things that surprised me is that Air Canada became aware of the video very, very quickly, but instead of like addressing the issue right away on a very broad series of platforms, the only thing they did for the first day or 36 hours was to respond to reporters and to people who were like sending them direct messages or Facebook or Twitter and say, you know, this is not what we do, et cetera, et cetera. The people will be penalized or punished or what have you. Instead of right away making their own position public, they kind of went at it piecemeal, which is...
I don't know. Did it work out well for them?
It didn't have as much impact as the FedEx one did. It did hurt them in terms of image.
Well, it's hard to, and it's hard when we talk about these mega, airlines and that are always in some sort of issue. But a lot of the times in those cases, the organization or the leaders within the organization are scared of putting light. For some reason, even though something's gone viral, they think, well, if we address it publicly, this is going to make it even worse, when they don't realize that minimizing it makes it worse.
Absolutely. So, crisis communications has been forever, and emergency management that's one of the areas I focus on. Both those fields have been totally changed and forever by social networks, and at the speed at which issues become crisis and then become really like cataclysmic in terms of like the damage they can inflict on your reputation. And there's lots of examples of that. You have to have the ability to occupy the public space, and that's what Air Canada didn't do. Like right away, as soon as that video comes out, hey folks, we're aware of this, we're inquiring, we're investigating, we can assure you that's not our normal way of doing business. Just that right away. Boom.
Yep. It shows that you care. Exactly.
And I'm always surprised that just that simple admittance of saying we're aware of it, we're working on it, it's not even an apology. The apology can come later. How often we don't even hear that?
And it saves. It's what I call the first response. It's not your official response. It's your first response. And, everybody, whenever I give trainings or, even just presentations, I'll always everybody always talks about needing to respond in real time. People don't really understand what that means. A lot of people think, okay, real time, I have up to 24 hours. 24 hours, you could have lost complete control of the situation.
Absolutely.
But then they say this isn't realistic for our organization. There's no way that we could respond, because I say real time is in 15 to 60 minutes from the time it develops an online presence. That is for best scenario for your organization. If you want to get ahead of the story, if you want to position yourself as the go-to resource for the crisis, there's so many advantages. In 15 to 60 minutes, if you can manage to do that. But what people don't understand is that it's not complicated. It's exactly what you said. It's that first response. It's 4 things. It's we're aware, we're looking into it, you show compassion and that you care, and that everybody can expect to hear back from you as soon as there's more news to report, or as soon as there's another update, or as soon as you know more. You can go a step further and say, we will be back at 11 a.m. with another update.
Yeah, and frankly, one of the things that does, I'm a big proponent of going out on social media to do that, because one of the things it does right away, it buys you time.
Exactly.
So especially with media, the legacy or traditional media, if you tell them, you know what, we're aware, we'll get back to you in a certain time frame, they're good with that. But you keep feeding the beast after that. I think a perfect illustration of how things have changed is when that U.S. Airways plane landed in the Hudson River in New York. Obviously,
that was one of the first situations of Twitter.
Absolutely. So universal center of the world, or, media capital of the galaxy, so to speak, things move fast. I remember reading that U.S. Airways had been criticized for waiting 13 minutes to issue anything about the incident. Now, 13 minutes. I realize it's New York City, but people who still think they have 13 hours to react are totally missing the point.
13 minutes is also, that's even less than my 15 to 60 minute counsel. But 13 minutes is just, it's to show the extremity. And the thing is that it doesn't need to be overwhelming. All you want to do is stop that influx of, hey, did you know? What are you doing about it? Have you heard? Are you even aware? You're not talking about it. What's going on? You could stop all of that and then do exactly what you said and buy your company time to then go in and pick up the pieces and look and examine and assess and then put out, more thoughtful, more targeted approaches to communications. But that first response is so easy to prepare in advance, and then to develop criteria of when this needs to be used and how.
I think it's an absolutely essential part of any crisis communications planning exercise that, what are your holding lines and how soon can you get them approved, and what kind of messaging have you got templated? Every business should have a pretty good risk management program. What some of the issues, from risks to your supply chain, for example, or, reputation type of risks about perhaps misconducts from your executives or anything like that. What could be coming your way. So there's absolutely no reason for organizations to be unprepared, to have at least some very basic messaging saying, as you said, we're aware of the situation, we're investigating. It's not, something that is normally associated with the way we do business, and we'll get back to you with more information as soon as we develop it. And,
And it makes you the resource. People will go to your platforms, to you, and it helps prevent rumors, it helps prevent speculation, it keeps people coming to you for more information rather than going elsewhere where you don't have control. It's simple in theory. It's just a matter of helping organizations, helping people understand the tools and the tricks and the strategies that we could put into place so that it becomes manageable and realistic.
I'm a huge proponent of the fact that although many organizations and senior executives find social media kind of scary and dealing with social crisis a very scary prospect, I think they don't see the other side of the coin, which is that all those technologies, what I call social convergence, they allow organizations to become their own broadcasters. Mm-hmm. And put out their own messaging immediately as soon as they can, certainly, and handle that whole apology preparation, on their own terms. You don't necessarily need to do it in front of the media anymore to be efficient. You don't need to call that big news conference. There's a lot of stuff you can do absolutely in partnership with the legacy media, but there's also a whole series of tools and processes that are available to you that you can do on your own and make sure that you reach all you use all channels to reach all targets, all audiences, and to me that's a critical aspect of the planning, and something I try to stress as much as I can when I talk to senior officials and executives about make sure that you have the ability to tell your own story, to occupy the public space, and don't rely on intermediaries to do that. I'm always surprised well into the 21st century, how many organizations still have crisis communications plan whose main audience is the media. That flabbergasts me all the time. Frankly, I cannot fathom that. As a former reporter, it's kind of paradoxical for me to say. But you don't need you don't need reporters anymore, really. Actually, you do.
You need to spread your message. It's great to if we look at the KitchenAid rogue tweet, that defamatory tweet that was posted on behalf of KitchenAid or from the KitchenAid account against the President of the United States.
Yeah.
What Cynthia Soledad, who's the managing responsible for that account, she's not the one who tweeted, but she's the one who's responsible. This is, to me, the perfect example of this was not an issue. This was a potential crisis because we're talking about defamation.
Yep. Now
we're talking about a legal matter. And she went on, the first thing she says, or one of the first things at least, was, I'm not the one who posted it, but I'm in control of, or I'm in charge of this account. I take full responsibility. So taking responsibility, then she proceeded to apologize, not just to the presidential family, but to everybody who who saw this tweet and who was subject to this tweet. And she went talking about media. She went a step further, and she could just imagine that headline, right? KitchenAid defames the president of the United States.
Absolutely.
Imagine. And she contacted,
those are keywords: responsibility, accountability, transparency. There is no effective apology without those. And I can give you the example of that Red Cross posting where somebody posted on the Red Cross account, he had a few beers and used a language that was not appropriate. And, the Red Cross handled this magnificently.
That was an issue. That was certainly not a crisis. As the Red Cross says, we deal with crises and emergencies every day. This is not a crisis. This is not one of them.
We're human. We made a mistake. We're making sure it doesn't happen again.
And they went further, and they partnered with the brewery that was mentioned in the beer that was mentioned in the rogue tweet, and they campaigned to get people to donate blood. Which is, when you were talking about the power of social media as a media outlet, the power of social media, that's an extreme power of social media. But the other side of it, or the other power of it, is the connection, the way that you can humanize your brand and connect with actual people, your stakeholders, and develop real relationships with them to, one, that's great for marketing, it's great for PR, but in terms of issues in crisis management, it's invaluable when you have a community that loves and supports your organization because they feel like they know you and they feel like they know the humans behind the brand. In a crisis, they are going to come to your defense and they will minimize the repercussions for you.
Again, there's a flip side to that, and that's a trend that kind of worries me a little about social networks, is that sense of outrage that is so easily perpetuated on social networks when something bad happens. And then sometimes it forces the hands of agencies, organizations, or companies to do what they think is necessary. And case in point is maybe a couple of years ago, you remember that this ad agency who managed the Twitter account, I'm not sure if it was for Ford or GM, and issued something about how people drive.
Chevrolet. Was it Chevrolet?
How they drove very badly in Motor City in Detroit and used profane language. And the result was that the ad agency lost the account almost immediately. because of that sense of outrage where, if you typecast that against, how the Red Cross and other organizations handle like similar false or mistweets, if you will. So it's interesting to see that agencies react in different manner depending on the kind of pressures that are put to them. I think it goes back to the cultural outlook that organizations have, how they treat their relationship between their employees and stakeholders and clients and so on. In that case, they took the extreme measure. Okay, you've lost the account, you're gone.
At the same time, though, I do see that they trusted this agency that was supposed to be professional to speak on their behalf, to represent their organization. And it did, if I'm not mistaken, I was just talking about this case today with somebody, and I'm like you, I think it was Chevrolet, but I could be wrong. I'm terrible at recalling things when I need to, names. But they had just campaigned for, I believe it was Detroit, and to bring Detroit up. So, and then this was said about Detroit drivers. So I do understand a perspective of this of, if I had a large organization, maybe I wouldn't go external. Yeah. Maybe that's a lesson there. But I think the expectations for the agency were higher.
Oh, you're right. And you're right. And what I was trying to say is that you have to be cognizant of that sentiment of, in the old days when you were outraged about something, you wrote a letter, or you phoned in a call-in show on the radio. Now, all you have to do to show your outrage is like go on Facebook and Twitter and what have you. And, this groundswell of outrage, if you will, builds up, and that adds to the crisis equation, so to speak. And yeah. I think that's something that's we'll see more and more of, and hence the need for organizations to be absolutely as prepared as they can be and as transparent and effective in their response as they can be when something bad does occur.
It's so important. The other thing is that, a lot of people vent and rant or attack an organization on Facebook or Twitter on a regular basis. It happens every day. It's when there's that emotional component, that, extreme negative emotion that is very relatable. That's when it gets sent off. And organizations need to understand that and then learn how to identify that. Is this something that could potentially grow because it's very, very relatable on a very emotional level with a large group of people? So that's one indicator of, because as brands get attacked all the time. So when you start looking at when does it escalate and which ones go viral and why, it's really that emotion that connects.
In the end, you're right. It's all about emotion, and that brings us back to that compassion aspect.
Yes.
I think people think this social networks really are all an amplification of behaviors we've had as humans for millennium. In terms, when bad things happen, when crisis erupts, we used to congregate at the temple or at the church, or in my case at the pub, and talk about things. And now we go online and we create those communities online where they share outrage or a particular point of view about what's happened. And but it's nothing new. It's just so amplified and so instantaneous that the pressures that it puts on organization is so tremendous that the one thing I hate to see people do is like totally circle the wagon and be totally on the defensive. I think that just brings invites more trouble. I think you have to be as proactive, as open and transparent as you can, and say, okay, if we did screw up, we'll own it and we'll make it better. And it's worked for organizations that have done it effectively.
It's worked because people understand. People don't want to be angry or feel betrayed from an organization that they cared about or that they felt an emotional attachment to or connection with. People, when you come out and you say, and you kind of make yourself a little bit vulnerable by saying, hey, we screwed up, we know it, we're sorry, this is what we're doing to make sure it never happens again, we really care about you guys, et cetera, et cetera. People go, what is there to say about that? Hey, they screwed up. Yeah, but who doesn't screw up? So they're fixing it. So we don't have to feel like that bond between us is lost or that we've been let down by the organization.
Yeah, I was going to say, and then there's Rob Ford.
Yes. Goodness.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's one thing. You can't. People are always absolutely. You're right. Ready to give people a second chance. I'm not sure about the third, fourth, or fifth chance.
Not sure about the third, fourth, or fifth chance either. But
so if you're gonna do things right, fix the issue, and in the case of even McCain, as I said earlier, for Maple Leaf Food, when they did experience some listeria issues after the first outbreak, they fixed it. They apologized for it, and they explained exactly what was going on, and they went over it. And their products are more popular than ever.
they were completely forthcoming, and they were empathetic, and they really cared. It's the secret.
I would have liked to be a little fly on the wall and listen into the conversations between all the corporate types and the lawyers and the crisis communications experts as they were, talking to the boss about what should we do here.
And I wonder. Well, it was the CEO, was it not, who made the and you could see that he really meant what he was saying. He wasn't an actor, or at least if he was an actor, he should be in the movies. But I would have loved to see that too. They probably had great counsel, but more than that, I think that they probably have a really great team, and they got it, and they really believe in the underlying foundations of the organization, and they must be, I want to say morally correct, but it must not have been that hard to get him to make those statements if he was able to do it the way that he did.
Absolutely. It begins at the top. You have to have somebody at the top or among your senior executives that understand that in the end it's about people.
Yes.
That, admitting that something went wrong or that you have to take the measures, as I said earlier, to deal with a crisis is not an admission of failure. It's a show of strength. It's a show of leadership that, when things go bad, you can look at me and I'll point you in the right way. And that I'm willing to listen to your advice and your counsel, and together we'll see this thing through. And, good leaders get that. Others
do. Jane Jordan Meyer says a good leader will lead in a crisis with his or her head and their heart. And I think that statement is just so powerful, because you have to be logical, you have to be strategic, you have to be compassionate, you have to care, you have to be human.
Yeah, and that's easier said than done, of course, especially for people who've been successful. If they're in that kind of position, they've had that record of success, and doing things their way probably, and having a set goals, and all of a sudden this crisis erupts. It deviates them from their normal path, and it takes some mental and certainly fortitude to deal with that kind of situation without losing the abilities that brought you where you are. And also, some people need to be sure that they have the ability to listen to what people around them tell them, because obviously you're successful, you're pretty sure and confident of yourself, but sometimes you do need that second voice or second opinion, that sounding board, if you will. Make sure, hey, boss, is that really what you want to say?
Yeah, absolutely. The art of the apology, the power of the apology, it's quite incredible, actually, when you're in a jam or in a tight spot, to how quickly it can help you come out of that.
As I said earlier, it works with my wife.
Yeah. Yeah, you said that before we hit record.
Yes.
Yeah. Any last, pieces of advice for organizations out there, or for actually people within organizations who are maybe fighting this battle with their leaders of their organization, to help them understand?
I think, the first rule is be as prepared as you can. Occupy that public space as soon as you can with relevant information. And that's a big if, because you don't have to do it all the time. If you ever do have to apologize publicly, do it with compassion. be bad now, but they'll get better together. Where by working, with all our partners, we'll make this thing right. And I think when your different audiences see that you're pointing the way ahead to a better situation, things will come through all right.
Absolutely. Patrice, it's always such a pleasure to chat with you. Where can people find and follow you?
I think if they go to Google, on Twitter, I'm at Patrice Cloutier. On Google, I'm easily findable as well. You'll find my blogger page, which is called Crisis Command Post. And I write a lot about that sort of thing.
You do for our blog as well.
I do, and I enjoy doing that.
Yeah, our readers really enjoy your articles. Always topical. Always good stuff. Good value.
Excellent.
Thanks so much for chatting with me. It's always a pleasure, like I said, and really great discussion. I mean, I could talk about this forever, but really great discussion on an important topic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this week's episode of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. Stay tuned next Sunday when I discuss how to overcome legal challenges within your crisis communications with Sarah Hawkins. We appreciate all of your support, and if you could share this podcast and even go on iTunes and Stitcher and write us a review, give us your thoughts and your feedback, as well as send us your questions and suggestions for topics on crisis communications that you'd like to hear about, we definitely want to hear from you. Also, if you have any questions for Patrice from this week's podcast that I either didn't get a chance to ask him or that you thought of during or after the podcast, feel free to send them to me via email, Twitter, any way that you feel comfortable. I'll make sure that they get to Patrice, and I will make sure to publish the answers to your questions in the form of a blog post over on the Crisis Intelligence blog at agnesday.com. Thanks so much for tuning in this week, and I look forward to talking even more crisis intelligence with you next Sunday.